The blood-red sun dipped below the dusty horizon as Florence Dawson stood on the porch of her dilapidated farmhouse, clutching the telegram that had shattered what little remained of her world. Her husband of 8 years was dead, killed in a mining accident that had claimed 12 other souls in the silver mines of Colorado Territory. The year was 1876, and at 26, Florence found herself alone with a failing farm and memories that cut deeper than the winter winds. The drought had been merciless for months. Florence's hands, once soft and delicate, now bore calluses and cracks from desperate attempts to salvage what crops remained. Her father had taught her to be strong, but he hadn't prepared her for this, the crushing weight of solitude in a land that forgave no weakness. As Florence stared at the parched fields that stretched before her, she noticed a cloud of dust in the distance. A rider was approaching. She reached for the shotgun that rested against the doorframe, her fingers tightening around the worn wood. In these parts, strangers rarely brought good news. The rider slowed as he neared the house, his tall frame silhouetted against the fading light. He dismounted with the easy grace of a man who'd spent his life in the saddle. "Evening, madam," he called, keeping a respectful distance. "Name's Jackson Irving. I'm looking for work and shelter for the night." Florence kept the shotgun visible. "I've got no work to offer, and no place for strangers." The man removed his hat, revealing a face weathered by sun and wind, but with kind eyes that seemed to hold no threat. He couldn't be more than 30, Florence guessed, though the West had a way of aging men before their time. "I understand your caution, madam," he said, "but I'm handy with repairs, good with livestock, and I've worked every kind of land from Texas to Montana. I'd trade honest work for a spot in your barn and whatever food you can spare." Florence hesitated. The roof needed patching before the spring rains. The fence had 3 sections down where the cattle could wander, and the well pump had been squeaking ominously for weeks. Tasks her Thomas had planned to fix before the mining company's promises of quick silver lured him away. "One night," she finally said, "and you fix that pump before you leave." Jackson nodded, a slight smile touching his lips. "Fair enough." By morning, Florence awoke to the sound of hammering. From her window, she watched as Jackson repaired not just the pump, but a section of fence she'd been meaning to fix for months. His movements were efficient, his focus unwavering in the early light. When she emerged with coffee, he tipped his hat in thanks but continued working. By midday, he'd repaired the chicken coop and was examining the roof. "Those shingles won't last another season," he said when he came down for water. "I can fix it if you've got materials." Florence shook her head. "I've got no money for materials, Mr. Irving." "I passed a fallen oak about a mile east," he replied. "Good wood there. I could fashion some shakes that would hold tight for years." She studied him, suspicious of such generosity. "Why would you do that?" "A man needs purpose, madam," Jackson answered simply. "And this farm needs hands." Against her better judgment, Florence agreed to let him stay another day. One day stretched into 3, then a week. Jackson worked from dawn till dusk, taking only brief breaks to eat the simple meals Florence prepared. He spoke little about himself, only that he'd been riding with a cattle outfit that disbanded after a bad season, and now he was heading to California to try his luck there. On the 8th day, as they sat on the porch after supper, Florence finally asked the question that had been bothering her. "What are you running from, Mr. Irving?" Jackson's eyes met hers, then drifted to the distant mountains. "Not running from. Running to. There's a difference." "And what are you running to?" He was quiet for so long that Florence thought he might not answer. "Peace, I suppose. A place where the ghosts don't follow." Florence understood ghosts. They haunted her dreams, wore Thomas's face, and whispered of failure. "Did you fight in the war?" Jackson nodded. "Confederate cavalry. Too young to know better. Old enough to regret it all now." "My Thomas was Union," she said softly. said it was the only time in his life he felt he'd done something that mattered. He was probably right, Jackson replied. Better to fight for freedom than against it. His honesty surprised her. Most former Confederates she'd met clung to their lost cause like a drowning man to driftwood. The next morning brought dark clouds and the promise of much-needed rain. Jackson worked faster than usual, securing loose boards and ensuring the new roof would hold. When the first drops fell, Florence found herself laughing a sound so foreign to her ears that it startled her. Jackson joined her on the porch, watching as the parched earth drank greedily. "Thank you," she said, meaning it for more than just the repairs. "I don't know what I would have done." "You would have managed," he replied. "You strike me as the kind who always does." The rain fell harder, drumming on the new roof, washing away months of dust and revealing the green that had been hiding beneath. Florence felt something shifting inside her, like soil breaking for a seed. As the weeks passed, Jackson proved himself invaluable. Under his care, the farm slowly revived. He mended fences, replanted fields, and even helped deliver a difficult calf that would have surely died without his intervention. With each success, Florence felt a cautious hope taking root. But with hope came fear, fear of depending on someone who would inevitably leave. One evening, as they sat shelling peas, Florence found her courage. "When do you plan to continue on to California?" she asked, trying to sound casual. Jackson's hands stilled. "Are you asking me to leave, Ms. Dawson?" "No," she admitted. "I'm asking if you're staying." Their eyes met across the table, and Florence saw something in his gaze that made her heart quicken. "I'd like to," he said quietly, "if I'm welcome." "You are," she answered, surprising herself with her certainty. The summer stretched long and golden. The crops flourished under Jackson's care, and for the first time since Thomas died, Florence began to think of the future with something other than dread. But as the harvest approached, so did the anniversary of her husband's death, casting a shadow over her tentative happiness. Jackson noticed her withdrawal. One evening, as she sat alone on the porch, he joined her with a cup of coffee. "I lost someone too," he said without preamble. "My wife, Sarah. Influenza took her and our baby boy 5 years ago." Florence looked at him, seeing the pain that still lined his face. "I'm sorry." "Some days, I think I've made peace with it," he continued. "Other days, the guilt is as fresh as it was then." "Guilt?" she asked. "I was away when they fell ill, driving cattle to market." His voice roughened. "By the time I got back, they were already in the ground." Florence reached out, covering his hand with hers. "It wasn't your fault. Nor was your husband's death yours," he said gently. "Yet you carry it like it was." She pulled her hand away, defensive. "You don't know anything about it. I know you blame yourself for not stopping him from going to that mine. I know you think if you'd been enough, he would have stayed." Florence stood abruptly. "You have no right." "No, I don't," he agreed. "But I recognize the look of someone punishing themselves. Been seeing it in the mirror for years." She wanted to deny it, to rage at his presumption, but the truth of his words stopped her. Thomas had been restless, always searching for the fortune that would make them wealthy. She had known the dangers of the mines, had begged him to stay with farming. But he'd gone anyway, chasing silver dreams that had turned to lead. "I couldn't hold him here," she whispered. "I wasn't enough." Jackson stood, facing her. Or maybe he was the one who wasn't enough. Maybe he couldn't see the riches already in front of him. Florence felt tears burning her eyes, tears she had forbidden herself for too long. When Jackson's arms encircled her, she didn't resist. She leaned into his solid warmth and let herself break, sobbing against his chest as the western sky turned from gold to indigo. "It's all right," he murmured into her hair. "It's all right to grieve." The harvest came, bountiful beyond Florence's hopes. They worked side by side, their movements falling into an easy rhythm. There were moments, brief touches, glances held a second too long that sparked something both frightening and exhilarating in Florence's chest. But as autumn deepened, old ghosts returned. Florence grew distant, finding reasons to avoid being alone with Jackson. She caught herself watching him with the farm hands they'd hired for harvest, laughing and at ease, and wondered what a man like him was still doing on her struggling farm. The answer came one brisk October morning when she overheard two hands talking by the barn. Irving turned down Caldwell's offer again, one said. Double wages and a share in the ranch. Man's a fool, the other replied. Everyone knows he's sweet on the widow, but she's cold as January, still wearing black for a husband 3 years dead. Florence stepped back, her face burning. That night she confronted Jackson as he repaired a bridle by lamplight. "Why did you turn down Caldwell's offer?" she demanded without greeting. Jackson looked up, surprised. News travels fast. This is a small community, and Caldwell's the biggest rancher for 50 miles. She crossed her arms. Why stay here when you could have security there? I thought that was obvious, he said, setting aside the bridle. Because you pity me? The words tasted bitter. Because you think I need saving? Jackson's expression hardened. Is that what you think of me? That I'm some knight-errant looking for a damsel? I don't know what to think, she admitted. Why else would a man like you stay on a farm like this? He stood, his height suddenly imposing in the small room. A man like me? Skilled, respected. You could go anywhere, do anything. And maybe anywhere isn't where I want to be, he countered. Maybe I'm exactly where I want to be. Florence shook her head. I can't be what you want, Jackson. I'm too broken. Thomas took parts of me to the grave with him. Jackson's gaze softened, but his voice remained firm. Then I'll treat you like something precious. He stepped closer, his hands gentle as they framed her face. Because broken things aren't worthless, Florence. They're just waiting to be made whole in a different way. The kiss, when it came, was tender and questioning. Florence felt herself responding despite her fears, her hands clutching his shirt as if afraid he might vanish. When they parted, she pressed her forehead against his chest, trembling. I'm afraid, she whispered. Of what? Of losing again. Of not being enough. Of failing you like I failed him. Jackson lifted her chin, making her meet his eyes. You didn't fail Thomas, and you won't fail me. Because I'm not asking you to be anything other than what you are. And what am I? Strong, stubborn, beautiful. He smiled. The woman I've fallen in love with. Florence pulled away, overwhelmed. I need time, she said. Please. Jackson nodded, though disappointment shadowed his eyes. Take all the time you need. I'm not going anywhere. The next weeks were a delicate dance. They continued working together, their conversation careful but kind. Florence found herself watching Jackson when he wasn't looking the way his hands moved confidently over machinery, how he spoke softly to nervous horses, the lines at his eyes when he smiled. And in quiet moments, she examined her own heart, searching for courage. Winter arrived with unusual ferocity that year. A blizzard swept down from the mountains, blanketing the farm in white isolation. Florence and Jackson worked together to secure the animals and stock the house with firewood. As night fell and the storm howled, they sat before the hearth, the cabin warm despite the freezing world outside. Florence had been quiet all day, wrestling with a decision. I've been thinking about what you said, she finally spoke. About broken things waiting to be made whole differently. Jackson set down the book he'd been reading. And? I don't know if I can be whole again, she confessed. Not the way I was before. But I think I could be something new. With you. The firelight caught the hope in Jackson's eyes. I'm not asking for the woman you were. I'm asking for the woman you are. Florence moved to sit beside him, taking his weathered hands in hers. Thomas and I were young. We loved fiercely but blindly. He was always chasing tomorrow, never seeing today. And now? Now I know that today is all we can be certain of. She met his gaze steadily. And today I know that I love you, not instead of him, not to replace what was lost, but because of who you are and who I've become beside you. Jackson drew her close, his kiss carrying all the words they'd left unspoken. Later, as they lay entwined before the fire, Florence felt the broken pieces within her shifting, reforming into something different but no less true. Spring arrived with a riot of wildflowers and promise. The farm flourished under their combined care, attracting notice from neighboring properties. One afternoon, Florence returned from town to find Jackson in deep conversation with a well-dressed stranger. "Mrs. Dawson," the man greeted, tipping his hat. "Edgar Whitman, from the First Bank of Denver. I've been admiring your operation here." Florence exchanged a questioning glance with Jackson, who nodded encouragingly. "Thank you, Mr. Whitman, though I can't take all the credit." "Indeed not," Whitman agreed. "Mr. Irving has been explaining your innovative irrigation system. I represent several investors looking to back promising agricultural ventures, and yours has caught our attention." By the time Whitman departed, Florence held a proposal for significant investment that would allow them to expand the farm without sacrificing control. As his carriage disappeared down the lane, she turned to Jackson in disbelief. "How did this happen?" Jackson smiled. "Remember that cattle buyer who stopped by last month? He mentioned our methods to Whitman." He took her hands. "This is your achievement, Florence. You kept this place alive against impossible odds." "We kept it alive," she corrected. "Together." That night, under a canopy of stars, Jackson asked Florence to marry him. Not with grand gestures or flowery speeches, but with simple truth. "I want to build a life with you," he said. "Not because either of us needs saving, but because together, we're stronger than our broken parts." Florence's answer was in her kiss, in the way her arms wound around his neck, in the tears that shone in her eyes. They married in June, beneath the oak tree Jackson had fashioned into roof shakes 2 years earlier. The entire community turned out, drawn by the story of the widow and the drifter who had found new beginnings in each other's broken places. As summer ripened into fall, Florence discovered she was with child. The news brought both joy and fear, memories of the baby Thomas had wanted but they'd never conceived, and of Jackson's lost son. "What if I can't do this?" she confessed one night, her hand protective over her still flat stomach. "What if I'm not meant to be a mother?" Jackson gathered her close. "You've nurtured crops from barren soil and hope from despair. This child could have no better mother." His faith in her, steady and unwavering, gave Florence courage. When their daughter arrived the following spring, healthy and strong lunged, she named her Sarah, honoring the woman Jackson had loved and lost. "Are you sure?" he asked, his voice thick with emotion as he held the infant. "Yes," Florence answered. "She's part of your journey, just as Thomas is part of mine. We carry them with us, not as wounds, but as wisdom." The years flowed like the creek that ran through their expanding property. 2 more children joined their family, a son they called Thomas, and another daughter, Emma. The farm grew into a thriving enterprise that employed many in the community. Jackson's innovations in irrigation earned recognition across the territory, while Florence's skillful management turned profit into stability. There were challenges, droughts, floods, the economic panic of '93 that nearly cost them everything. But through it all, they faced the world side by side, their love deepening with each obstacle overcome. On their 20th anniversary, as they watched their children dance at a community gathering, Jackson squeezed Florence's hand. Do you ever regret it? He asked. Taking a chance on a broken drifter all those years ago? Florence looked at the life they'd built, not just the prosperous farm or their beautiful children, but the community they'd helped strengthen, the friendships they'd forged, the example they'd set of resilience and renewal. Never, she said, leaning her head against his shoulder. Some breaks are just the beginning of something stronger. Jackson kissed her temple, his touch as reverent as it had been when he first declared she was precious. Who would have thought, he mused, that two shattered souls could build something so whole? Florence smiled, thinking of that desperate woman who'd stood alone on a failing farm, shotgun in hand, heart encased in grief. How far she had come, how far they had traveled together. That's the miracle of it, she said softly. Not that we were broken, but that we chose to mend together. As twilight painted the western sky in hues of amber and rose, Florence and Jackson watched their legacy unfold before them, not merely in land or wealth, but in the love they had cultivated from the soils of loss. They had learned that the most precious treasures were not those unearthed in silver mines or cattle fortunes, but in the courage to remain open when every instinct demanded closing, in the faith to see beyond brokenness to the beauty waiting to emerge. And as the stars began their nightly vigil over the land they had tamed together, Florence knew with unshakable certainty that some journeys only begin when we think the road has ended, and that sometimes it takes breaking to discover just how strong we truly are.